echo Terrell. Thank you for coming here to hear about a very difficult but very important topic. Now, it's not easy to hear about this. It's not easy for me to hear Terrell. It kind of brings me back. But it is so utterly important. There are 80 to 100,000 people as we sit here right now, sitting in solitary confinement cells across the United States. It is out of sight, it is out of mind. Because it's not visible, we're not aware of it. And like Sandy said, she believed in the ideals of our system. I did too when I started off. I basically thought that you have a few issues here and there, unfortunately, but I had no idea of what I ultimately learned about our criminal justice system and specifically the horror of solitary confinement. So that's the story in a nutshell. Is, as Sandy said, I was an idealistic intern working with women. I wanted to make a difference. I was learning to become a therapist. I was in the clinical track, working in the nursery with babies, very hopeful, and it all went well. I really enjoyed it. I connected with these women. I knew nothing about solitary confinement. Rikers Island, for those of you who don't know, at that time was a complex of 10 distinct jails. So it's huge. I was in one, and you really don't know what's happening in the others. At the time I was there were 20,000 plus people on Rikers. And again, Rikers in a nutshell are primarily people who've been charged but not convicted. They are on Rikers not because they are guilty or innocent, but because they don't have the money for bail, which puts you at a tremendous disadvantage in trying to resolve your case. And most people are going to take a plea bargain just to get off Rikers because the wait for trial can take so many years. So it's nothing like what we see on Law and Order, the reality of it. It's a joke. So anyway, I loved it, and everyone thought I was crazy, but I felt this was my calling. I went back to Rikers, but I began working with men, and things became much more serious there. I met many, quote, Khalif Browders, people who said they hadn't done anything, and I started becoming more and more disillusioned about the system. Meanwhile, I was hearing more and more about this, what they call the Bing, the jail within jail on Rikers. And all I thought to myself was, thank God I've got nothing to do with this. This just sounds too grim for me. I just want to do my thing in my sessions, etc. But that's not the way it worked out. I kept progressing, and then I was promoted to an assistant chief. Each jail has an assistant chief and a chief. I needed it. It was tough being on the front lines, listening to people. There's no happy stories in jail. But little did I know I was going from the frying pan into the fire because I first worked at the 350-bed psychiatric center, which is another story for another session. But on to the next and final post was acting chief of mental health in the 500-cell solitary confinement unit. And I can remember my first day there very well. I was told that Mary, if they had no mental health issues before they entered solitary, they do now. And virtually everyone was on some type of psychotropic medication. And I remember asking myself, what kind of a punishment is this that people need to be medicated in order to endure it? But I went along. This is what it is. I'm learning about it. I'm told it's for the worst of the worst, the baddest of the bad. Were it not for this, we would all be in trouble. Keep holding these people at bay. Here you have one of them sitting there. So off I went, and little did I know really what I was getting into. The big trick was we had a team of a couple of psychiatrists, a psychologist, and clinical social workers, was to keep the meds from breaking down. Keep prescribing. Don't let the meds break down. That was my primary job, to be sure that happened. But there comes a point when medication can no longer hold a human psyche together, and we would be called to a cell door. And the scary thing, or the disturbing thing about this, was how regularly it was. We would go to a door, and I'll be blunt with you, we would see people, agonized people, just begging for some type of relief. I saw blood-stained walls, head banging, makeshift nooses, excrement, incoherent babbling, and as a team, we had to decide. We did have the authority to allow a temporary reprieve, which reminded me of taking someone out who's drowning to catch their breath and throw them back in. But we were under very fierce pressure to not let anyone out, because this is the punishment and you're expected to endure it. And because it is so horrible, so many people are saying they're suicidal, they're hearing voices, and so now the diagnosis malingering starts coming up more and more. And I really think that was like a way to cope with what you were seeing, and you had so few options to do anything about. So we would get the call to come over, and I remember mental health, you're like, great, 4th floor, and you go up this creepy little elevator. And before I would go, I would have to stop and splash water on my face, and I started smoking. So yeah, I wasn't that idealistic intern anymore, just to brace myself for what I was going to be faced with and what decision we were going to be asked to make. And I remember walking over there saying to myself, this can't be as bad as it seems, because this is the United States. The flag is flying above the jail. We've got doctors here, board certified, officers in Navy uniforms. I had this battle going on in my head to con myself that this was legally sanctioned and kind of, Mary, what's your problem? But by the time I would get to a cell door, my knees were always wobbling. And you would open it, and you would try to talk to the person, and you would huddle to the side of the cell and try to figure out, can we up the medication, change the medication, find some magic words that they can hang on for a few more days, or are they going to be dead in the morning? And that's how it was. And I just kept thinking to myself that all of us, well-intentioned, we were essentially at this point monitors of human suffering. We really were. And it was just mind-boggling to me, and I couldn't imagine really how any of this jived with our codes of ethics. And I also felt very angry. I felt like I was being asked to make decisions that no person should ever be asked to make. We were under so much pressure to not let people out, but no one was to die. So you would go home at night, did I make the right decision? Are they going to be okay? Are they going to make it? You'd have input from everyone and decision made. You'd be faced with the same thing the next day from that person or somebody else. And that is what life is like in a solitary confinement unit, where mental health teams are just intertwined with this practice. I mean, on my very first day there, the deputy warden they called it the Bing, said, my door is always open for mental health. And believe me, elsewhere on the island, they hated us. But here, he said, face it, your interventions are what make this place manageable. Basically, we're able to carry this out because you can medicate people, you can predict pretty well if someone's going to die and pull them out. And I think back on that a lot, about his words. And again, just about our role in all of this. And there's something very, very wrong with this picture. I really feel that for those of us who worked in these, we've lost our way. And this applies to psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers. You're basically a cog in a wheel. I've been asked, well, why didn't you just let everybody out? Well, you just can't do that. First of all, they give you about 4 spare cells, and you've got 500 people, and I would have been put in a rubber room until they figured out how to fire me. So I wriggled as best I could. I did everything that I could within the constraints that I worked to help people. But it ultimately reached the point where I could no longer do this work. I had been disillusioned all along with bail, with the brutality, everything that you're seeing in the newspapers now. And I left Rikers, but I wasn't going to forget. And so I started writing a book, and I was going to enlighten the world about all of this. And this is It took me 10 years to write it and to get someone to publish it, because prior to this explosion of information, no one talked about it at all. I got turned down at least 50 times. This is our criminal justice system. So I always sat there by myself thinking, did I imagine all of this? You know, am I crazy? And no, I wasn't. And then the New York Times started out of the blue bringing things up that corroborated what I knew. So it was very validating. And then thankfully, here we are with a growing awareness about all of this. And so I continue to do this work. I am very much an advocate for the incarcerated, especially the mentally ill, and those in solitary confinement. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.